Welcome to Bagel Monday, the podcast where two data nerds take on tech trends, AI, business insights, and the future of work, all with a smear of humor.
Hello, Dave.
Hi, Sarah.
So we're wearing props today.
We are. Why is that?
Well, I feel like it's a subtle nod to the conversation we're about to have.
Which is?
We're going to talk about AI.
AI. And why is it why are we wearing sunglasses? Why did you make me bring these today?
All right, it's kind of nerdy, but I do like props and I like pop culture references. And the big buzzword of AI right now is agents.
The agents.
Yes. So we're
secret agents. Yeah,
we're
clearly.
Totally. Yeah.
Clearly. That makes sense. No,
I mean, we look like secret agents, don't we?
I could see that. We do. Yeah.
I guess we don't have to wear these now.
Okay.
All right.
Fair enough.
No, but that is the term of the year, I would say, agents. But I thought we could just talk about AI today.
Yeah. I mean, it's the big topic. Has been for a while. We're doing a lot of stuff with it. All my conversations are about AI in some way, shape, or form. But it means different things to everybody. And I think that's probably the right place to start with this conversation is what are we even talking about?
Well, I thought we could start with a little fun introduction to AI because I do think AI has been a part of culture for a while, specifically pop culture. I think it started in movies. So I thought we could talk about some of the well-known AI villains that we've been introduced to over the years.
Yeah. A good place to start.
I think there's a really good one if you want to guess what it is that might somehow have some relationship to your name.
Yes. Hal.
Yes.
Hal, what is it? 9000?
Hal 9000.
9000. I had a server named that once.
I don't know what I think about that.
Yeah. Well, it did not become sentient and lock me out of a spaceship. But yes, I do have a personal connection to Hal 9000. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't do that.
Yes, it's so creepy. Big red floating eye. Yeah, Space Odyssey. Yeah, was that Stanley Kubrick? I feel like it was.
That sounds right.
Because he always did the creepy villains.
Yeah.
And all right, so that to me is one of the most well known, but I think there's one more that is really well known too.
Oh, of villains.
Mm-hmm.
I think of if it's like personified villain, I think of Age of Ultron a lot. Like that was they brought an AI into like a humanoid, but I think Terminator is probably the biggest one for me of like AI villains.
That's where I was going.
Okay,
by the way.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that was kind of like the amorphous AI. I mean, there's all the robots, but the AI taking over where they had to,
Yeah, because Skynet was, it became the downfall of the world where it had John Connor coming, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Coming back to the past or going back to the past.
Wait, no, Sean Connor. Was it Sean?
Well, I thought it was John.
John Connor?
People are going to correct us on this.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then Sarah Connor, his mother.
That's where I'm getting this from. Yeah, you're right. It's John.
Okay. So trying to stop, Skynet apocalypse.
Yeah. So. I think that's one of the more realistic ones. Not that I think that's going to happen, but they didn't try to depict the AI as being in a human form. Like, the AI we're using today is, clusters of GPUs, right? It's like super intelligence is unlikely to come from a little chip that you stick in the brain of a humanoid looking robot. But that's much more likely to come from a large cluster of servers.
But that's how they portrayed AI for so long, was the more humanoid, villain-esque kind of approach. And so I think do you think that's why people have a fear of AI, is because that's how they got to know AI?
Certainly pop culture has depicted AI as dangerous for a long time. I think there's also just a fear of the unknown. You look at, I think, a lot of people's first experience with ChatGPT or something similar was like, oh, wow, that feels really human. I'm not sure what I feel about that.
Yeah, the responses that it gives you these days is very human.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're chatting with a friend sometimes rather than a computer.
Yeah, especially the voice. Have you tried the voice mode?
No, I know you
ChatGPT?
haven't, since
Yeah.
I've heard your voice on the Chat GPT and just how normal it sounds. I've been afraid to use it. Again, I'm afraid of Skynet. I'm afraid of the Matrix, Agent Smith, all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Matrix is another.
I mean, that's next level villainry.
Yeah, for sure.
But AI as a villain isn't the reality of AI.
No.
So what is AI actually?
Yeah. Well, so we mean a lot of different things when we say AI. I think the general population, most of the time when it's used today, is talking about generative AI, specifically ChatGPT style things. But we've been using artificial intelligence to describe machine learning for since the 80s.
Oh, you're jumping ahead. We're doing terminology later, but I guess.
Well, you asked what artificial
Nice.
intelligence
All right,
is, so
all right.
I'm
Good
defining
point.
it. I think as far as like what is it at its essence, it's about a machine simulating something that looks like human thought. And the earlier versions, 80s, 90s, early 2000s of AI is mostly like what most people call machine learning most of the time, which is it's all pattern recognition, right? It's all I've seen these series of things in the past, and I'm going to predict the next one. But it's very different if you're trying to predict, if somebody is likely to churn as a customer. That's not, ChatGPT is not actually very good at that kind of thing. It's a very mathematical, like let's look at a bunch of points and we'll build a model specific to that, and refer to that as sometimes artificial intelligence. I feel like usually AI gets put on the more difficult to understand machine learning. So if you think about like a neural network has often, like pre-ChatGPT, I think a lot of people thought of, well, I'll call it AI if it's a neural net. And that's, it's just, again, just math trying to predict something, but it's kind of like multiple layers, and it's meant to somewhat simulate how the human brain works, but it's still just building a, predictive model off of things that you've seen in the past. Reinforcement learning is another one that I think of as sort of AI type of algorithm, where basically you're feeding something back into the model that it's seeing. This gets used in robotics a lot, right?
Okay.
So you have a model that's kind of driving the robot, and it's got a camera, and it's got sensors and all of that, and it's learning to do something by trying to do it and then getting some feedback, like a baby does. That's reinforcement learning, and all of those aspects of it come into the generative models, the large language models, the multimodal language model. We'll talk about that stuff, I guess.
We will.
But the generative stuff like ChatGPT, that's like the main thing it's predicting is text. That's to me where we really get into what most people mean when they say AI these days.
Yeah, I think that is because most of them are using it to create conversations or even marketing or trying to change a tone of something too. But I want to talk about some of the AI we're seeing happen within the business world today.
Yes.
And the two things that I thought we could break down for people are agentic AI, and how is that different from a chatbot? Because I think people just don't understand that difference right now. And why are agents so big right now? Why are we hearing so much about them? Which one do you want to tackle first?
So I think it's intertwined. So we have to start. So everything sort of agentic is built around the idea of the large language model. Right. So
well, all right. Maybe we should do some terminology quick here.
Probably. Well, let's talk about what people perceive as agents first before we get into the weeds. So you and I have had this conversation a little bit, and when we first started talking about agents, like last year sometime, it wasn't that buzzwordy.
It's everywhere now.
It's everywhere, but But you had said, well, isn't that a chatbot or, something like that? Like there's
Because
all
I
these-
thought it was. I
Yeah.
thought it was going to be a chatbot. I'm like, they're just making a fancy marketing term for it. And
Right.
it's not.
Right. And so chatbots, we've had those for, I don't know, when did Alexa come? I feel like that was whenever Alexa was released. It was.
Do we have an Alexa we can ask?
I don't.
No.
Not in the office.
No.
But it's probably, I don't know, let's call it 8, 9, 10 years ago, something like that. We started
At
to get
least
this sort of
5 years. I
conversational-
know
Yeah.
that.
We got this kind of conversational chatbot thing, and they started popping up on all the websites and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, use this instead of talking to a real person, and they were crap, right? Like,
Yeah.
most people were just frustrated. The basic questions they could ask, okay. But driving that, all the cloud platforms came up with these. Basically, driving those chatbots was you would program a set of intents. So somebody might be asking to, in the case of Alexa, is like turn on a light, or you might be asking a question that you could go search for information because it's Google. You might be asking to play Spotify. Right?
I ask it to meow
Okay.
for my cats.
We're always going to get cats in every episode, right?
We are. It's called Box of Cats.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
yes, I'm just letting you know a feature about Alexa.
I didn't know that, but so that works because there's an app that somebody installed, and that adds an intent to Alexa as a whole list of things that, like, I guess you can ask it to meow, and then that triggers a workflow, and then that triggers it doing the thing. It's not very intelligent. The intelligence is in the voice to text.
Where it emulates an actual conversation.
Yeah, so it's like what Alexa did is made what Amazon did when building Alexa. It made a really good microphone that's really good at understanding voice, and then all of it's very much machine learning. Driving, being able to understand what that is, but then the internals of that was not very smart, which is where it gets tripped up on all sorts of things.
So, a question I have for that too, maybe this would be really helpful for the people listening. When Alexa captures your voice, what kind of data is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's capturing the audio, and then it's translating the audio into English text, or I guess whatever language.
Would that be considered structured or unstructured data?
I would call that unstructured. I mean, the intents. So it's grabbing sort of the unstructured like stream of what you said, and then it's structuring it based on you have these 5 apps and the 30 default things that Alexa can do. So it's structuring that by saying this is the intent. This is the the nouns and verbs basically of what goes into the system. So it's structuring that to the point where it can go make the API calls and come back with a response.
I think that's the one thing that a lot of people don't understand about AI, though, too, is the type of data that goes into it.
Yeah.
Where it doesn't have rows, columns, it doesn't have a shape to it. It's very amorphous.
Well, depending on what AI.
Oh, okay.
means here.
Good point. Good point.
Generative AI,
Yes,
like
yes.
ChatGPT, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get to talking about what those are some more. So
Okay.
yeah. So
Agents.
So so that's kind of the traditional chatbot. The big thing about ChatGPT when it came out is, it wasn't that. It was. It not yet, I wouldn't call it agentic, first versions of ChatGPT, but it wasn't like looking at a list of intents and then putting something out. It was basically taking a long string of text, whatever your input was, and then outputting a long string of text. And what it was emulating is what's the most likely thing a human would respond to in, having read the internet. Which is, is trained on a huge amount of text. Like, how could I respond to this? With some randomness thrown in, which is what that was part of the trick that makes it feel really human. Is if you ask it the same thing twice, it's not going to answer exactly the same things. It breaks out of patterns and stuff like that. It makes it feel a lot more intelligent. But at the end of the day, it's just, string of text in, string of text out. More recently, we've gotten multimodal models, which means it's not just text, but it's all behind the scenes stringing it into the same type of tokens. So it can sort of reason and think about text, like written typed text, bits. And it can also think about like voice, like us talking, and it turns that into the same type of thing. It turns images and videos also into the same type of thing, so that it can kind of look at this
You can make decisions off of that.
Which, if you haven't played with some, you can.
It's a little scary.
In ChatGPT app, and a lot of them now, you can turn on a video mode, and you can like talk with it while you're showing it your, car engine. And
because you do that,
things.
don't you?
Yeah. I play with all this stuff. But yeah, you can point it at something and be like, what should I do about this? And you're trying to fix something on your car. It's like, where's my carburetor? Cars don't have carburetors, only old ones. But like, I think I need to do something with my carburetor. Where is it? And it'll like describe what it's seeing to you and like go do this thing. So it's pretty incredible. But it's still tokens in, tokens out based on what it's seeing. So that's the model. Okay, so
that is or isn't an agent.
So it's not yet an agent.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's an official definition, but I'll give you mine. And so all of that is the model, and agents are built around the model. But the word agent, agency, agentic, all of that has to do with decision making. So
it has agency.
It has agency to be able to do something. So, not just I can sit here and respond to you. That's not really agency. It's just, hey, what is the most likely thing that you want me to respond with based on the question that you're asking? And then it spits it out. But what we do when we build agents, and this is the thing driving a lot of innovation right now, and it's actually incredibly powerful, is we take the language model as kind of this core reasoning type of thing, because you can ask it a question like, hey, based on this document, should I do this, this, and this? Based on the thing that my customer just asked me, should I file a ticket, or should I, offer them a promotion, right? Or should I just respond because they're just they're just chatting? So those types of like decisions, or you think about an individual working a role in a business, they're making decisions on a regular basis about what to do. So to build an agent, the core thing that you're doing is you're still feeding in a bunch of input, context, whatever, but you're doing it in the context of a traditional software program that is essentially going to take the output of the LLM, and it's going to generally come back from the LLM as structured because you prompt it to. You say, hey, you can do one of these three things, or you can just have a conversation.
Okay.
And when it responds, it can respond with a tool call. So basically, we're giving the LLM access to tools. And what we're actually doing is we're prompting the LLM to give us, give me one of these three things. And then the output of that, we take and we feed that into some piece of code where if it says, hey, I'm going to open a ticket in Jira, then the LLM is going to format some code, some text, some structured text that said, hey, it seems like the user's having this issue and we're going to file this ticket. And that's what comes out of the LLM. And then the computer program that's running, written in Python or whatever, is going to take the output of that and use it to call a regular old API that's part of a regular old system, and make a call into that with the outputs that it's giving, and it's able to do that. So that's called tool use in agents, and that's one of probably two, or I would say three main things that makes an agent. So it's got to have tools it can use, because that's the decisions that it's making. The other thing it's got to have is memory. So
because it has to store all of that.
Yeah. So you're having an ongoing conversation, and it has to if you use ChatGPT, you don't really realize this. If you use the APIs, you find out real quick. Like ChatGPT doesn't remember anything. It's the program around it is like saving the message thread. But when you make a call to the APIs, if you want it to know about previous conversation, you have to pass the entire conversation back in.
All right. So we got tools, we got memory.
We got tools, we got memory. And the third thing is basically that it operates in a loop. So
tell me what that means.
Okay, so what I mean by that is you're going to make a bunch of LLM calls, and essentially one of the things that you're prompting the AI, the LLM to do is decide when it's finished.
Okay.
So it's able to use several different tools. It's able to respond. And what you get it to give you is, hey, when you're no longer, when you've accomplished the goal, stop. Well, while you haven't accomplished the goal, keep using these tools to try to figure it out or ask the user for clarification.
Okay.
Or whatever. And and it runs like that. Usually, most programs have some sort of, it can only run up to, 20 times, 30 times or whatever, because it can sort of run away with itself and get stuck in loops and things like that sometimes, because we still have, we're still dealing with LLMs and they hallucinate and all of that. So anyway, there's that path, but basically it's going to say, okay, I've done enough. I have an answer. So, a support agent, for example, that's trying to answer questions about somebody's business, one of the things it can do is go and look up in your knowledge base information.
That could potentially
It goes
help.
and does that, gets the information back. It then sort of asks itself, do I have enough information?
Okay.
If not, it can make another call. If there's nothing in the knowledge base, it could go do a Google search, and it uses these different tools until it gets through. So tools and memory in a loop, making decisions to decide to do something with an LLM as kind of the reasoning thing behind it. That's an agent.
That's a lot. All right, I have questions.
All right.
All right, so the example you used was for support. That really changes how people interact with support today. Do we think that this is a better experience for people, or do you think it's just easier for the business to manage support tickets because of that?
I think it can be either. The reason agents are very buzzwordy right now is, well, it's still very new, and we're coming up with better ways to build them, and they're getting really interesting. I think there's been a lot of attempts to build like chatbots for support because it's a big cost center for a business, right? So, hiring humans to answer calls all day long, it can be costly, and the experience often isn't that good. If there's a lot of backlog there, we all sat on calls for an hour on
and you don't get a
waiting
response either.
Yeah, so that's frustrating. So obviously, if I can talk to a thing instantly that can solve my internet issue and I can just move on in 5 minutes, I want that.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to sit and wait for a long time. The problem earlier, like the less intelligent it was, the more likely that is to be a bad experience, and you're just, pressing 0 the whole time to try to get to a real person. So the AI, the agent, needs to be really good.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Is it?
So this agentic approach, what we've found is this is how we make it really good. And, we're
a start?
Yeah.
Skynet?
So it's not, it is definitely not yet a Skynet.
Okay.
So it's still just doing predictive stuff. And, one of the things, there's been a lot of talk about this over the last, months, 6 months or so, where the LLMs themselves really aren't getting that much better. They're getting more specialized, but they're not getting that much better. Most of the innovation right now in AI tools is because we're training models to do more specific things, like call tools more consistently, like make more specific questions, and we sort of string them together and we build all these controls. So it's turning into fairly complex software, actually, but the intelligence side of it is still it is not approaching like consciousness,
sentient
even
level.
though it's feeling smarter and smarter because it's able to sort of work around the inherent limitations of language models, like context limits, for example. That's getting longer, but you can only put so much text into these models before they start forgetting stuff. I mean, this is probably the most common experience we've all had with ChatGPT. Is
That's exactly what I was just thinking of. It forgets in just a few questions.
Yeah, so you've got a great conversation going. I was talking with somebody yesterday. They were doing something, and it was answering crazy questions about documents. And he's humming along, everything perfect. And then 5, 6, whatever, 8 questions in, like it didn't even, like the questions were or the answers were so wrong.
Yes.
Like it didn't even make any sense. And so that has almost everything to do with the context window limit and the focus of that. So agents is another way to go solve that.
Okay. So agents being the trend of this year, beyond support, where else do you see agents fitting in within a business? I mean, would it be anything that's customer facing? Would it have to be something that is repeatable? I'm just really wondering where else we think this is going to start being a trend.
Yeah. So I think the most obvious place is for fairly repetitive things you do a lot of. So
support makes a lot of sense.
Support makes a lot of sense. I mean, we see people using this stuff for sales related activities, and hit and miss with how good it is. I get tons of obviously AI generated spam emails now, but I get some that are really good. I'm like, I'm almost positive that this was AI, but it feels very personal, and it's actually speaking to the needs that I have as a software startup owner,
because it's personalizing it.
That. Yeah. So the business development rep role of sales, where you're trying to reach out in a personalized way to thousands of people, that's a really obvious use case for these agents.
So my brain right away, when you say that, if we're talking some of these support roles are now going to roll into an agent, and now BDRs or business development reps also are going to roll into a potential agent. Is the agent an actual villain to some of these roles? And what do people do?
I don't know that it is. I think a lot of stuff changes, like the better these agents get. Delve into the philosophical for a second here. But I think...
I'm sorry, Dave.
Sorry, can we not do that? I think for me, the role of humans in all of this stuff is to do the things that humans do really well. So now some of the voice AI stuff is getting pretty good, but at the end of the day, I would prefer to talk to a human most of the time. And so, if the AI agent can automate some of there's no reason for a human to need to find the best time to schedule a phone call. Nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, I really, really want to just wrangle calendars today. Well, they probably are. I'll take that back. And, some people are really good at that organizational side of things. But from the role of a seller, they should be building personal connections with potential clients, right? And understanding their needs and helping, guide them towards a solution. That's what a really good seller does. And, if you're spending 8 hours a day just trying to get a hold of somebody with a slightly personalized message and then rescheduling calls all the time, like those are the types of things we can automate with an agentic approach, where the agent in this case has a tool to understand your calendar, has a tool to do web searches, has a tool to answer emails, that kind of personal assistant stuff. And it can just, do that very, very quickly all day long until the sales rep or the support rep, whatever the role is, can then just focus on the actual problem solving and solutioning, which is really, when you boil down what the role is meant to be, it's that, not all the administrative work around it.
So what I'm hearing is that if we approach agents and use them correctly, that it could be almost we all get our own personal assistant of sorts?
Yeah, 100%. Personal assistants are coming, and they're coming fast, and I'm here for it.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and so one of the other interesting. Have you heard the MCP? Have you heard that?
No.
It's more of a sort of technical buzzword people got real excited about recently. So that's Model Context Protocol.
Okay.
And what that is, it was released by Anthropic, one of the big AI sort of ChatGPT competitors, and they basically released it's a common protocol, common way of having agents be able to talk to tools. So LLMs to be able to call tools.
So one of those 3 steps you talked about.
So a common way to do it across. It's not just for Anthropic. Lots of people are adopting it. And it's basically becoming the new way for AI to talk to like traditional software.
Interesting.
In a standardized way. And that's going to power a lot of these things. And there's some very interesting tools coming out that'll let you kind of drag and drop build your own agents. And N8N.io, have you seen that one?
Mm-mm.
That's the one I see the most. There's some interesting things there. There's also Scout.
I've heard of Scout.
It's a local company here in Charleston.
Is it really?
Yeah. And they're doing some super cool AI agent, building things. So
we should get them on the podcast.
We should have them on the podcast.
Along with Ruby's Bagels.
Yes.
Okay, so personal assistants coming soon.
Personal assistants are coming, and that's going to basically remember who you are and your preferences, and have the ability, probably through MCP, to call a bunch of other things and talk to other agents. Google released a kind of adjacent thing called agent to agent recently, A to A. That's about agents talking to agents. So then my like when you and I decide that we want to record a podcast episode,
our agents talk to each other.
Our agents talk to each other to see
have my agent talk to your agent.
Have your agent call my agent. Yeah. We can finally say that without having to be rich and famous.
Right? Not in a movie. No, we're just entrepreneurs.
And so that's 100% coming.
Okay.
And I think we'll probably get some really good versions of that this year.
But this isn't what you meant when we were talking about BDRs and support people necessarily. But what it could mean is that it makes the interpersonal relationship better because they're not doing as many things as they were before.
Yeah. Well, so let's say I have, 12 useful hours in a day.
12? I feel like that's generous. Do you have 12 useful hours in a day?
Probably not.
Yeah.
But for sake of argument,
okay,
let's say that I do. And would I rather spend that doing administrative stuff, or would I rather be speaking with clients, speaking with prospects,
maximize your time,
network, FaceTime with people talking about challenges that they're having, and then distributing the rest of the work other places, or doing whatever my deep work is that I'm trying to do, focused on the some deeper thought, working on code, working on blog posts, recording podcasts.
Maybe our agents will record podcasts for us.
Well, have you seen that with Google's Notebook LLM? Notebook LLM,
I know.
podcast generation.
They make themselves so interesting.
Yeah. So yes, an AI could do the podcast for you, but I don't know.
Would they talk about box of cats, though? I don't think
probably
they would.
not.
No. All right. So it can maximize the amount of time that you have in a day. What do you see next for agents? What do you think the next big thing is beyond that?
Well, so a lot of the development is just in improving different aspects of it. So, you can improve the core model, you can improve the memory, you can improve the tool use, and you can improve how people can assemble these for themselves. And there's as far as the components you need for an agent, that's most of what you would need. But so the memory management, that's something that people are getting better at, as far as like how can it remember the right things and forget the things that it shouldn't, or forget the things that it should forget. And so I think we'll see that getting better, but sort of people being able to assemble agents for themselves, I think is the kind of next big frontier.
I think that's where I've been seeing some of these organizations go. I mean, that's what Salesforce is saying that you can do, build your own agent.
Yeah. Well, and so it's people assembling them for themselves, and then it's just all the products that we use today building more specialized agents that are just really good at accomplishing specific things. So, at Query, we've been very focused on this agentic approach for
tell us more, Dave.
for data analysis, right? So let me load in a set of data, and I have business questions. Let me ask the business question. Let the agent figure out how to do all the cleaning and the transformation and the which statistical model should I use, and then how should I analyze it, and just come back to me with an answer. So this whole like iterative approach and using tools and checking itself and going through all those things. But we're really focused on the question of how do I answer business questions through data.
Well, and I really love Query's approach too, and this isn't just a shameless plug for Query though either, because
I'll take it, though.
I mean you can take it because I think Query is a fantastic platform. Even prior to knowing what Query was, the conversation I've had with people at large is accessibility to data.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons I was so excited about Query, is because you are making data not only accessible, but easy to understand and approachable, especially with what you're talking about. Like you can talk with your data, you can use an agentic approach with your data, and you don't have to have, like our last episode was how hard can it be? Yeah. Data analysis used to be incredibly hard, and it still can be, but you're making it so much easier for people.
And a big part of how we're doing that is through agents, through basically, doing data work is a process, and it takes, certain steps you have to go through, and you have to think about certain things. And, an LLM all by itself can't reason through the whole process and kind of, should I be cleaning it now? Should I be joining these tables? Should I build a model and then interpret, all of these steps? Like it's a little bit much for at least current day language models to work through. If you think about a human working through these problems, like it's also iterative. Coding is another thing. There's, a lot of hay being made right now around, automated AI-based agentic, whatever, coding assistants. I use them. They're great. And the reason they're getting good is because they're able to do this agentic stuff where it's kind of chunking the problem down. I'll do a little bit, I'll see the result. I'll do a little bit, I'll see the result. That's this loop that we were talking about. And that's how humans work through problems, right? We don't get presented with a big, large, complex problem, and at least most of us don't, and then say, oh, here's the answer, and go. And early LLMs would do that with coding. It's like, here's a big problem. It's like, great, here's all the code. But it was almost always wrong. But now it's like, well, let me do the small thing and then the next small thing. And so we're doing that with data. But you can translate that into anything, right? So if you think about
life,
break your problems down into
consumable pieces,
smaller chunks, and then work through it for sure. And I think that'll be our personal assistant agents. But we go back to, we started on support and sales. If you take the process and break it down some, it's like, well, to do a good sales outreach, you need to go learn about who you're going to be pitching to first. Right. So if one of your tools in your agent is the ability to go look at their LinkedIn and look at their homepage and read their most recent press releases, and if it's
what do they post about frequently, like what's important to them?
What are the owners talking? But that's very time consuming, to go do all that research. So an AI agent could go do all of that for you, take in all of the things, knowing what it also knows, in its memory about what your company does. So if you're pitching, be data lit and education services around data, then you're going to go find out, well, how would they be using data and what type of data team do they have today? Are they likely to be, 101 level or 301 level? And what are you going to pitch to them? Because it would be a lot more meaningful if they have a data team and you want to go help them with that, to say, hey, I saw that you lead up the data team. Is there anything that we can help with here? Versus if you say that when somebody has no data team, then you could personalize that more, and an agent can figure that out for you.
Well, you just made me think of something too, especially going through that. And this is something that comes up in education frequently, is just bias. And if we as humans were the ones doing that research, bias would be introduced right away. But in order for us to be as impactful and effective as possible, removing that bias would be the best path forward. And honestly, I do think that's something AI helps with, is that it can help remove some of that bias. So you can actually have much more targeted, non-biased conversations.
Yeah. There's a super interesting thing in the weeds there from what you mentioned, is that another thing that agents are often doing in that loop is checking themselves. And it turns out that LLMs are quite good at doing that. And what happens is you sort of prompt them differently at different times. Just like, if you're writing a blog post, you sort of do your creative writing, you're in one thought process, you go back and edit it, you're in a different thought process. So LLMs can kind of work like this. And if you're building an agent, or even a multi-agent kind of thing, depending on how you think about it, but you can have a step in there that says, hey, is there any chance that bias was introduced in the course of looking at this? Is there anything that you could do to remove that? And if you ask that question of ChatGPT or Grok or Claude or whatever, then it's pretty good at saying, oh yeah, well, it might have come in there, and then it can adjust its approach. So a lot of the agent building stuff that people are doing, there's often a QA check kind of step in there somewhere that says, is this really right? And we do it in query. Is this actually a data derived answer, or was it made up somewhere along the line?
What about, I know that in the past, some of the predictive models, or when you had to use test data. So if the test data does have an innate bias to it, though, that's part of the training data.
Yeah.
So
and that's still a challenge, because LLMs have been trained on things that were written in the past. So bias can get into it just by, it's still just repeating the things that it learned to repeat from all of the things that it read before. So there's a lot of work that goes into, improving the training data set, and then also checks that happen. If you use Azure's AI, for example, they have, from Microsoft, they have a built-in content filter when you call it, for a few reasons, but one is to check for sort of bias and harmful responses, because if you just leave the LLM model all on its own, it can repeat some stuff that we wouldn't want it to repeat. So we add some layers.
This.
Yeah. So the core service providers are doing some of that. But the people building these agents, when the better they get and the more they think about the problem, you can kind of find where these different manufacturers would call them failure modes, where does it go wrong, basically.
Okay.
And if you're manufacturing widgets, there might be 6, 7, 8 specific ways that it most commonly goes wrong. There's too much humidity in the factory, and that makes the paint doesn't set correctly. So that's a failure mode that you look for. So I think about that a lot with just anything AI related.
What's the failure point?
Yeah. So what are the failure sort of cause and effects, right? What's the thing that led to it? But then you can start to look for it and you can build into your process that. And that's why these agents then are getting really specialized, because it turns out you can't just train this sort of generic model that can do absolutely everything and then expect it to do absolutely everything. Like, OpenAI's models do a lot of things, but most people's experience when they really try to work with it extensively, they're like, okay, it looked like it was going to work great, but it doesn't quite do everything I need, or it breaks down at this and this and this time.
The deeper you go, the more it breaks down.
And so this wrapping the LLM capabilities with these other things, the tools and the memory and in a loop and having them talk to each other, that's how companies are solving these problems, because they can build it in a very specialized way to do it exactly what they need.
All right, so we talked about a lot of terms today, and let's pretend people were going to get a pop quiz at the end of this. You're not, I'm sorry. But I think it's really important for people to really know what some of these terms mean. You said LLMs.
Large language models.
Okay. And what else did we talk about today?
I threw MCP out there.
You did.
You probably don't need to know that unless you're building with it. The model context protocol.
Neural. You did.
Yeah, neural network.
Yeah.
So, fancy math to try to make decisions.
It's supposed to mimic what your brain does.
Yeah.
Let's see, what else are other terms that people should know about AI? Machine learning is another one.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the really important things when people throw out AI is just like try to understand what it is they're talking about. Is it a GPT, Chat GPT, generative pre-trained transformer model? That's
I feel like that should be at a trivia.
Yeah.
Bar trivia somewhere.
Yeah.
Your team would win.
Well, only if we were talking about
AI.
Nerdy AI stuff. Quiz me on pop culture. I won't necessarily do great. But anything else we talked about? Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing from a terminology perspective is AI doesn't mean much.
I consider it just like a blanket term.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell people. It is a term that is at the top of a hierarchy that has many things that fall within it.
Yeah. And so you can't infer very much when somebody says, I have an AI thing.
No.
It depends on what it is.
So like you talked about GPTs, we talked about agents, personal assistants coming in the future. I think AI is already embedded in so much of what we do, but we don't even know it's there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's coming to everything, right? There's not a product company in the world that's not like, how can we build an agent to do a part of what we're doing? So,
I mean, how many companies have already said that they're investing in the next year or so?
Yeah. So I think that'll be the biggest trend, is you'll just see agentic kind of things showing up everywhere. So it turns out they're kind of hard to get right. So, I think people will be doing a lot of experimentation to see, does this actually improve my workflow, or am I better off using the thing I'm more familiar with? And we're going to see this tension for, probably years to come around, do I still want to use the old drag and drop thing, or can I actually just, ask my agent to go work with my CRM and file all the stuff, make the next action or whatever. And, that's coming for sure, but, how much can you trust it? So I think a lot of working with AI right now is still, try to get it to do as much as you can, but look very critically at the results that you're getting, because that's still really important.
I think that's a good ending. And I think, too, that AI is not a villain. I think it's just really unknown yet. And it's newer, some of these things, especially agents. And I think agents are going to be where mainstream businesses really start incorporating AI into their functions that at least impact their workers.
Yeah.
More than anything else.
And I think it's still super early, but it's definitely worth thinking about, what could you pull together? There's a lot of resources out there people are putting out of how to build these things. And if you're inclined to go and tinker with, workflow type tools. It's surprisingly straightforward to get something at least simple up and running with all of these things that are out there. So it's fun times.
I think too, we would be remiss to tell people, especially with some of the things you mentioned today, where certain functions within support will become part of an agent, certain parts of other jobs will become part of an agent, that our responsibility to ourselves in the workforce is to keep upskilling ourselves and in some cases reskilling, because technology is going to impact us. It's impacted all of us. You're building a platform around technology and AI. So
the biggest thing for me there is, whatever it is that you're doing for work, try to figure out if AI could help you do it 3, 5, 10 times better. Like, don't think about could you replace that entirely. Think about what are the really high value things that you do in your role. It's gonna be difficult for AI for at least a long time to do all parts of that, right? So if you can figure out where the real value is and focus on getting really good at that, and then leveraging the tools that we have, agents being the latest thing in our tool belt, how can you be that much better at what you do? I think that type of attitude is going to keep you, successful in whatever you're doing for a long time, because we're far from, Skynet.
thank God. I don't want Skynet yet. And I don't think any of you want Skynet or Hal. And hopefully you came away from this with a better understanding of AI. And if you don't, we'll have more episodes that I'm sure break it down even more as changes happen.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Also, this is Bagel Monday, and we want to thank our people who have made this possible. Harbor Entrepreneur Center.
Yes.
Where we are at the moment.
Recording this. Be Data Lit.
Be Data Lit. Query. And though they are not in front of us, we are still fueled by
Ruby's Bagels.
Thank you, Ruby's. We hope that you're here with us one day to talk about your story. All right. Thank you, everyone.
See you next time.